morning, grade fives, and welcome to another English lesson with me, Miss Kun. Remember that if you've got any questions with this lesson, please email them to grade5@worksheetcloud.com. So I hope that wherever you are in the country and whatever you are doing, you are relaxed, you are sitting down, you focused, and you're just ready to listen to a beautiful story. Remember that we are reading together Kensuke's Kingdom by Michael Morpurgo. Morpurgo? Still don't know how to pronounce his surname, so I do sincerely apologize if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. Right, so just to recap, in the last video, we spoke about chapter 4 and we looked at part 1 of chapter 4. And chapter 4, for those of you that have forgotten, it is called Gibbons and Ghosts. Right, so we learned a little bit more about the island on chapter 4. And now in part 2, we're going to learn a little bit more, and you're going to see and wait and see what happens next. Right, so are you ready to figure out, well, to see what happens in the rest of this story? Right, so I'm on chapter 4 called Gibbons and Ghosts, and this is part 2. We found our beach once again and set off round the island, keeping wherever possible to the edge of the forest, to the shade. Still, we found no stream. Again, I saw plenty of fruit, but always too high, and the trees were always too smooth, too sheer to climb. I found plenty of coconuts on the ground, but always cracked open and empty inside. When the beach petered out, we had to strike off into the forest itself. Here too I found a narrow track to follow. The forest became impenetrable at this point, dark and menacing. There was no howling any more, but something infinitely more sinister. The shiver of leaves, the cracking of twigs, sudden surreptitious rustlings, and they were near me, all around me. I knew, I was quite sure now, that eyes were watching us. We were being followed. I hurried on, swallowing my fear as best as I could. I thought of the gibbons I had seen back in the zoo and tried to persuade myself how harmless they had looked. They'd leave us alone. They'd never attack us. They weren't man-eaters. But as the rustlings came ever closer, ever more threatening, I found it harder and harder to convince myself. I began to run, and I kept running until the track brought us out to the rocks, into the blessed light of the day. And there was the sea again. This end of the island appeared to be littered with massive boulders that lay like tumbled cliffs all along the coast. We leaped from one to the other, and all the while I kept a keen eye out for the trickle of a stream coming down through the rocks from the forest above, but I found none. I was exhausted by now. I sat down to rest, my mouth dry, my head throbbing. I was racked with desperate thoughts. I would die of thirst. I would be torn limb from limb by the monkeys. Stella's eyes looked up into mine. "There's got to be water," I told her. "There's got to be." "So," said her eyes, "what are you doing sitting here feeling sorry for yourself?" I forced myself to my feet and went on. The seawater in the rock pools was so cool, so tempting. I tasted it, but it was salty and brackish. I spat it out at once. You went mad if you drank it. I knew that much. The sun was already low in the sky by the time we reached the beach on the other side of the island. We were only about halfway round by the reckoning. This place was so much bigger than it had seemed from high up on the hill that morning. Despite all my searching, I had found no water, nothing to eat. I could go no further, and neither could Stella. She lay stretched out beside me on the sand, panting her heart out. we would have to stay where we were for the night. I thought of going into the forest a little way to sleep on ground cover under the trees. I could make a nest of soft, dead leaves. The jungle floor was thick with them. But I dared not venture in, not with the shadow of nightfall fast over the island. The howling had started up again, far away in the forest. A last, mellifluous, even song, a chanting that went on and on until darkness covered the island. Insects, that is what I presumed they were anyway, whirred and whined from the forest. There was hollow tapping, like a frantic woodpecker. There was scraping, scratching, and a grunting, grating noise that sounded like frogs. The whole orchestra of the jungle was tuning up. But it wasn't the sounds that frightened me. It was those phantom eyes. I wanted to be as far as possible from those eyes. I found a small cave at one end of the beach with a dry, sandy floor. I lay down and tried to sleep, but Stella would not let me. She whined at me in the pain of her hunger and thirst, so that I slept only fitfully. The jungle droned and cackled and croaked, and all night long the mosquitoes were at me too. They whined in my ears and drove me mad. I held my hands over my ears to shut out the sound of them. I curled myself round Stella, tried to forget where I was, to lose myself in my dreams. I remembered then that it was my birthday, and thought of my last birthday back at home with Eddie and Matt, and the barbecue we'd had in the garden. How the sausages smelled so good. I slept at last. The next morning I woke cold and hungry and shivering and bitten all over. It took me some moments to remember where I was and all that had happened to me. I was suddenly overwhelmed by one cruel reality after another. My utter loneliness, my separation from my mother and father, and the dangers all around me. I cried out in misery until I saw that Stella was gone. I ran out of the cave. She was nowhere to be seen. I called for her. I listened for her, but only the gibbons held in reply. Then I turned and saw her. She was up on the rocks high above my cave, half hidden from me, but even so I could see that her head was down. She was clearly intent on something. I clambered up to find out what it was. I heard her drinking before I got there, lapping rhythmically, noisily, as she always did. She did not even look up as I approached. That was when I saw that she was drinking from a bowl, a battered tin bowl. Then I noticed something strange up on a flat shelf of a rock above her. I left Stella to the water feast and climbed up further to investigate. Another bowl of water, and beside it, palm leaves laid out on the rock and half covered by an upturned tin. I sat down and drank the water without pause for breath. Water had never tasted so wonderful to me as it did then. Still gasping, I lifted aside the tin. Fish! Thin strips of translucent white fish, dozens of them, laid out neatly in rows on the palm leaves, and 5, 6, 7 small red bananas. Red bananas? I ate the fish first, savoring each precious strip. But even as I ate, I was looking around me, looking for a telltale trembling of leaves at the edge of the forest, or for a trail of footprints in the sand. I could see none. Yet someone had brought this to me. Someone must be here. Someone must be watching me. I wasn't sure whether to be fearful at this revelation or overjoyed. Stella interrupted my thoughts. She was whimpering pitifully at me from the rock below, and I knew it wasn't love or comfort she was after. She caught every strip of fish I threw her, snaffled it in one gulp and waited for the next. Head on one side, one ear pricked. After that, it was one for me, one for her. Her beseeching eyes would not let me do otherwise. The fish was raw, but I did not mind. I was too hungry to mind, and so was Stella. I kept the red bananas all to myself. I ate every single one of them, but they weren't at all like the bananas back home, but much sweeter altogether, much juicier, much more delicious. I could have eaten a dozen more. Once I'd finished, I stood up and scanned the forest. My benefactor, whoever he or she was, had to be somewhere nearby. I was sure I had nothing to fear. I had to make some kind of contact. I put my hands to my mouth and called out again and again, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." My words echoed round the island. Suddenly, the forest was alive again with noise. A great sound of singing and hooting and howling and cawing and croaking. Stella barked wildly back at it. As for me, I felt suddenly exhilarated, elated, ecstatically happy. I jumped up and down, laughing and laughing, until my laughter turned to tears of joy. I was not alone on this island. Whoever was here must be friendly. Why else would they have fed us? But why wouldn't they show themselves? They would have to come back for the bowls, I thought. I would leave a message. I found a sharp stone, knelt down, and scraped out the message on the rock beside the bowls. "Thank you. My name is Michael. I fell off a boat. Who are you?" After that, I determined to remain on the beach all that day and stay close to my cave and the rock above where the fish had been left for us. I would keep it always in sight, so that I would at least be able to see who it was that had helped me. Stella ran on ahead of me down into the sea, barking at me, inviting me to join her. I didn't need any persuading. I plunged and cavorted and whooped and splashed, and through all my antics she just cruised steadily on. She always looked so serious when she swam, chin up and paddling purposefully. The sea was balmy and calm, and barely a ripple of wave to be seen. I didn't dare go out of my depth. I'd had quite enough of that for a lifetime. I came out clean and refreshed and invigorated. A new person. The sea was a great healer. My bites were still there, but they did not burn any more. I decided I would explore further along the beach, right to the end if I could, just so long as I could keep my cave in view all the time. There were shells here, millions of them, golden and pink, thrown up in long lines all along the beach. Before long, I came across what seemed at some distance away like a flat wedge of rock protruding only very slightly from the sand. Stella was scrabbling excitedly at the edge of it. It turned out not to be a rock at all, but a long sheet of rusted metal. Clearly all that was left of the side of a ship's hull, now sunk deep in the sand. I wondered what ship it was, how long ago she had been wrecked. Had some terrible storm driven her onto the island? Had there been any survivors? Could any of them still be here? I knelt down in the sand and ran my hand along it. I noticed then a fragment of clear glass lying in the sand nearby, from a bottle perhaps. It was too hot to touch, too hot to handle. It came to me in a flash. Eddie had showed me how to do it. We'd tried it in the playground at school, hiding behind the dustbins where no one could see us. A piece of paper, a bit of glass, and the sun. We had made fire. I didn't have any paper, but leaves would do. I ran up the beach and gathered whatever I could find under the trees. Bits of cane, twigs, all sorts of leaves, paper thin, tinder dry. I made a small pile on the sand and sat down beside it. I held up my piece of glass close to the leaves and angled it towards the sun. I had to keep it still, quite still, and wait for the first wisp of smoke. If only I could get a fire lit, if only I could keep it alight, then I could sleep by it at night. It would keep the flies away and the animals away too, and sooner or later a ship had to come by. Someone would spot the smoke. I sat and I sat. Stella came over to bother me. She wanted to play, but I pushed her away. In the end, she went off and sulked. Stretching out with a sigh under the shade of the palm trees, the sun was roasting hot, but still nothing happened. My arm was beginning to ache, so I arranged a frame of twigs above the leaves, laid the glass across it, then crouched by it and waited. Still nothing. All of a sudden, Stella sprang up from her sleep, a deep growl in her throat. She turned and ran down towards me, wheeling round to bark her fury at the forest. Then I saw what it was that had disturbed her. A shadow under the trees moved and came, lumbered out into the sunlight towards us. A monkey, a giant monkey, not a gibbon at all. It moved slowly on all fours and was brown, ginger brown. An orangutan. I was sure of it. He sat down just a few feet from me and considered me. I dared not move. When he'd seen enough, he scratched his neck casually, turned and made his way on all fours slowly back into the forest. Stella went on growling long after he had gone. So there were orangutans here as well as gibbons. Or perhaps it was orangutans that made the howling noise and not gibbons at all. Maybe I'd been wrong all along. I'd seen a Clint Eastwood film once with an orangutan. That one, I remembered, had been friendly enough. I just hoped this one would be the same. Then I saw smoke. I smelled smoke. There was a glow in amongst my pile of leaves. I crouched down at once and blew on it gently. The glow became flames. I put on a few more leaves, then a dry twig or two, then some bigger ones. I had a fire! I had a fire! I dashed into the forest and collected all the debris, all the dried up coconut shells, all the wood I could find. Back and forth I went until my fire was roaring and crackling like an inferno. Sparks were flying high into the air. Smoke was rising into the trees behind me. I knew I could not rest now, that the fire would need still more wood, bigger wood, branches even. I would have to fetch and carry until I was quite certain I had enough to keep it going and enough in reserve. Stella, I noticed, would not come with me into the forest, but stayed waiting for me by the fire. I knew well enough why. I kept a wary eye out for the orangutan myself. But I was too intent on my fire now to worry much about him. My pile of wood was huge by now, but all the same I went back into the forest one last time, just in case the fire burnt itself out quicker than I expected. I had to go deeper into the forest, so it took a while. I was coming out of the trees, loaded with wood up to my chin, when I realized there was much less smoke coming from the fire than there had been before, and no flames at all. Then through the smoke I saw him, the orangutan. He was crouching down and scooping sand onto my fire. He stood up and came towards me, now out of the smoke. He was not an orangutan at all. He was a man. And there is a picture. Right. How interesting. How exciting. So, I hope that you enjoyed that. We will dive into chapter 5 in the next time that I see you. And so, boys and girls, I hope that you enjoyed chapter 4. It was a long chapter, but an exciting one. And we are, I would say, halfway through the book, actually. So we are halfway through the book. And I think we are about to meet Kensuke himself. So you're just going to have to wait and see what happens. But for now, it has been awesome reading to you. And I really hope that you're enjoying this book as much as I am. I hope that you have a wonderful day further. I shall see you all next time. From me, Miss Kun, Hakuna Matata. And remember, be kind to one another. Bye.